All of a sudden it's pouring out. The mayor comes in and the
I
sky
come in,
opens
Phil
up.
Paleologos barges into the studio.
That's all right. Phil's part of the furniture. Yeah, so he's cool. Hi, Phil.
Casey's here, you know.
You want to sit down and chat,
Everybody
Phil?
wants to comment about my tie.
What is this, criminal? Okay. Ah, all right. We're going to take a look at that in just a couple of moments. So,
despite all these distractions, Barry, I am prepared for your questions.
We're professionals. We just carry on. Rain, the sky opens up.
Yeah,
Phil walks in.
look at
Casey's here getting the cameras ready and everything, so people can watch us on YouTube, on the WBSM YouTube channel. People will be able to watch this later on. So what have you been up to? I haven't seen you in a while.
I've been bouncing around. The scheduling of our program has been a moving target.
How about if we just call the show This Week with the Mayor instead of Midweek with the Mayor?
Well, most Wednesdays work for me. Sometimes they don't. So, like yesterday, we had the Mass. Right? Well, we had a couple of things yesterday. We had the Mass Mayors Association meet at the Whaling Museum, and we had the Lieutenant Governor there, as well as Anita Walker, who's the head of the Mass Cultural Council. So we talked about arts and stuff, and had a discussion with the Lieutenant Governor about a bunch of different things. And then we had the EPA administrator in town, who's brand new. He succeeded Scott Pruitt, who left, with controversy swirling around him a few weeks ago. And we had a good visit.
Was he the drunk, or was that? No, that was the veterans guy, right? That was the drunk.
I'm not sure who the drunk was. No,
there's always controversy around
Pruitt
everybody.
had.
What was his controversy? I don't remember.
Well, it had to do allegedly with his. There were a number of things, but it all sort of boils down to his, taking advantage of his public position. Anyway, so he had things like, and certain extravagances built into his office. He had a luxury apartment in D.C. that was owned where he was living when he was in D.C., which was owned by a lobbyist. He was trying to get his wife to purchase, this is all allegedly, to purchase a Chick-fil-A franchise, and he was using his office to advance that. So there were lots of allegations swirling around him.
What is it with some of these people that when they get elected to office? Now you didn't do this, but I mean, Deval Patrick. Remember, he gets elected governor, and he goes out and buys like $75,000 worth of drapes for. Politicians, not all politicians, but some people when they get elected to office, they just kind of
have to be careful about those appearances, right? So there are some people who abuse the position, right? And frankly, my take on it is if you're really abused of it, if you're stealing, you should be going to jail. But what a lot of others do is they, sometimes there are moves decisions that are made that are somewhat tone deaf, right? So, in the case of Deval Patrick, I don't think, he was trying to make the office look better, and the governor's office should look good, but it probably wasn't the first thing he should have done while in office. I mean, we've spent a good deal of money making our city hall look a lot better, because our city hall should look good. I mean,
and we got curtains from Walmart for like $3.99 per window.
We've gone out and looked for bargains, right? But we spent money on it because it should look good, and I don't think anybody disputes that. It's just not the first thing you want to do when you get into office, right?
So anyway, you had the folks yesterday from the EPA, and that's an interesting story, because I can remember being a cub reporter many years ago, and Jack Markey was the mayor, and they didn't know what to do with the harbor. They were literally afraid that if they stuck a shovel in the thing, it might disrupt the chemicals that are there, and it could be an explosion. The whole thing could just blow up. They didn't know. They had no idea. And here we are now, close to 40 years later, and we're still working on the same project.
Now you're really dating yourself.
I am dating myself big time, 40 years in the business this year. Can you believe it?
No kidding.
Yeah.
You should have some kind of celebration.
I should get a watch for that. I think you're right. We should have a parade. We should.
We should. I'll give you a mayoral proclamation.
There you go. That? Okay, that's cool. I think that's cool. You're writing that down, John, over there?
Yeah.
All right, write it down
on the list. But no, the harbors, I mean, geez, it's a tough thing for the city, but the good news is we're getting out ahead of it. I mean, I walked him through the history, right? So the history of the contamination in the harbor really goes back to developments that occurred in like the 1920s, right? So at the heyday of the textile era here, there were textile mills up and down the harbor, especially in the north end, right? If if you picture now, if you look at what's there now, it's still a lot in the way of mills, but where the park is now and where Market Basket is now is a huge set of mill complexes, right? There's the Fairhaven Mills and a number of other ones that were there. And when in the late 20s, as just before the stock market crash, the textile industry started to crash here. There was the big strike in 1928. And then once New Bedford got into the Great Depression, I mean, it hit here much harder than most other places around the country because we were so heavily committed and relying on textiles, and textiles just evaporated almost overnight, and to the point where even in the Depression, we had one of the highest unemployment rates in the United States in like the high 30s, which is just astonishing, right? So, a lot of the business leaders in the city at the time said, we've textiles have literally gone south, and we've got to replace them with something. So they started recruiting businesses, manufacturers, to occupy former mill space. And two of the manufacturers that were recruited were AVX, Aerovox, and Cornell Dublier, which are the two sources of pollution in the harbor. So AVX, Aerovox, was established right on Riverside Avenue and Belleville Avenue, and made capacitors, and in the manufacturing process there were PCBs used, and they just dumped it out the back door into the Acushnet River.
I think everybody thought that it just came in and out with the tide, right, and just washed away. Right.
And this was before it was identified as a potential carcinogen. You wonder back then, like, what are you guys really thinking? Do you think this any good could have come of your dumping that into a waterway? Well, it turns out it wasn't, and it's been demonstrated, although there's some argument on this, that it's a proven carcinogen. But it's definitely on the list of toxic substances that are regulated by the EPA, have been since the 1970s. So, and because of the huge volume of dumping, it's spread across the harbor, and New Bedford, when the so-called Superfund legislation was passed by Congress in, I think, 1980, which was meant to deal with the most toxic waste sites in America, New Bedford Harbor was designated the first marine Superfund site in the United States. And what's really difficult is it's the fact that it's a marine site. It's underwater, and digging underwater costs a lot more than it does on land. And so that's why, by the time we're done with this,
those guys have to keep coming up for air, right?
Yeah, well, it's that, but it's you have specialized contractors who do the dredging, and they have to do it in a very precise way. And so the long story short is that Congress has funded that program. It's the digging has the clearing up has proceeded in fits and starts, but never fast enough. And so up until recently, when 5 years ago now, AVX settled with the EPA to finish its responsibilities for the cleanup, so they paid another $400 million to wrap it up. And that has accelerated the remaining cleanup from a period of about 40 years down to about 7 years. So that's good news. So what that's meant in the last few years for us is that we've worked very closely with EPA to make sure that what's left behind, it really works for New Bedford. So in the Inner Harbor, we're working with them to make sure to advance maritime projects, particularly in the North Terminal area, where we'd like to build a bulkhead that would be good for fishing and offshore wind and other activities there. And that was a big part of what I discussed with the administrator yesterday. And then in the Upper Harbor, north of 195, north of Cogswell Street, that area we want to turn into a riverwalk. Some of it's been built in the last few months, but the rest of it's waiting for the completion of the cleanup to be constructed in earnest. But what we want to leave behind is something fabulous for the north end that brings people into to the city as well. And but it takes a lot of work ahead of time to get to that point. So that's where we are.
Yeah. Will there ever be a time when that water is safe to swim in or
to swim? Yeah, I think it's still an industrial harbor, so
right.
No, you shouldn't be fishing it in any case. You shouldn't be cohogging in it, right? Once you get to the outer harbor, it's cleaner, and those restrictions won't be in place. But in the inner harbor, inside the hurricane barrier, it's always going to be an industrial harbor. So it's not a place where you want to fish or cohog or do anything else that entails ingestion.
Sure. People used to. I mean, people used to do that.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. People used to swim in there.
But that's the idea. I mean, just picture what the sketch that I've been trying to picture, and some of this work was done by the previous administration. We've been really dug into it in earnest. Is in the Northern Harbor, north of Coggeshall Street, we want that to be a really nice recreational space. So you have a great walking trail that along the mills, the former mills, now residences, and where there's a lot more water activity. It's a great place for rowing, right? It just so happens that topographically, it's very well suited for crew racing. So I'm not a rower myself, but what people in the business and the sport will say is it's perfect because it's over 2,000 meters long, and it's straight, and it's pretty calm water on most days. And so that is a prime space to host crew races. And so we've had interest from a number of universities to host crew racing there. There's been some of that was occurring before the cleanup really started to ramp up. But once the cleanup is done, and actually before the whole cleanup is done, when they're done with the Northern Harbor, the Upper Harbor, we'll start to be able to lay down the groundwork for crewing activity and maybe even some sailing activity up there.
So we've got that site, the harbor site. We've got Sullivan's Ledge. Is it Sullivan's Ledge? Yeah, up on Hathaway Road. Right? Yeah. And so how long is that going to be tied up? How long before we can actually develop that, or is that going to be?
Sullivan's Ledge is developed now. It's developed as a solar field.
Right.
It's city-owned land. The field itself is.
But there's not much else that can go there right now.
No.
Right?
And it's not. It's a filled-in quarry, as you know. So it's not like a great place to build anything anyway, because it's if you put something heavy like a building on the top, you might have a problem with settling. But for something as light as a solar field, it works. And, it's still being monitored. The groundwater is still being monitored. If you remember, there's that really big building right on Hathaway Road next to all of it. That is actually a water treatment plant that the city was required to build and operate as part of the remediation of that site. So we still operate that to make sure that the water that runs off of that site doesn't contaminate there's a little river that runs across the street and over to the golf course. And it's not cheap. It costs the city about $200,000 a year to run that thing. And we're trying to get to a point where we wind that down. But in the meantime, the solar field is saving the city a lot of money. And we've had now 2 EPA administrators who've come to that site to want to see it because it's known nationally as a real great example of a city taking a Superfund site and reusing it into something that's actually very positive for the community.
So the city owns that property.
Yeah, we own that property.
And you own we own the city. Taxpayers own
the building, but not the solar farm itself. That's owned by a private entity. It was owned originally by the private partner we had in the project, Sun Edison. Sun Edison went into bankruptcy. They sold that field off, and I can't remember the name of the company that owns it now.
So we get revenue from that?
Well, yeah, we get under the agreement we get essentially credits off of our electricity bill. So that it's a 1.8 megawatt site. So it effectively powers about 200 homes. So we save, I can't remember what the numbers are specifically for that site, but I think it's in the ballpark of about $500,000 a year in electricity savings to the city. Which is significant.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we've had a number of brownfields cleaned up slowly but surely over the years. Riverside has become a park now, and some other down at the end of Brook Street. Those mills are down, and down the south end. So what are we still looking at in terms of hazardous real estate?
Not many. I mean, there's some. I mean, there's there are things like the Parker Street waste site is largely cleaned up. There are a couple things that need to get closed out over there. There is the mechanical room under the high school that needs some additional work, and then there's a couple of other sites around there that need a little bit more work. But that project is probably about 95% done at this point. There's things like the old Elko Dress site on Church and Brook Street that there needs to be a little bit more work there, but not much. Those are the biggest ones. as I think about sort of my mind just sort of scanning the city. I mean, those are the big ones, and then of course the harbor. The harbor's still,
Morse site. Morse district.
Yeah, of course there's that one, right? So there are two parcels, right? So the one to the east is the one there are two. The one to the west, that's where the where Serenity Gardens is, and backs out against St. John's Church. That site's cleaned up. The one on the east side is not cleaned up yet, and I'm glad you raised that one, because that's one that continues to be contentious. That site is owned, I forget all the corporate entities involved, but I think it's ultimately owned by CBS, Viacom of all corporations, and so we've been pushing them to actually put some money into cleaning that up, and it's going to be left up to the Mass DEP, the Division of Department of Environmental Protection, to force them to do it. So that still remains a little bit contentious, but that that neighborhood's had concerns about migration of groundwater. That it doesn't appear that's a problem, but even still, it's a site that needs to just be finished off.
Yeah. So that's
there's that one.
There's really not much of this begun there at all, right? I mean, they took the building down, but I mean, there hasn't been any remediation there at all, has there?
No, there has. I mean, the bigger of the two properties has been cleaned up. There are two. I mean, if there are two parcels there, right, and the bigger of the two has been cleaned, and it's the smaller one that still has to be addressed, and it's taken way too long. But by and large, that's it. I mean, there are a handful of other parcels around the city that require some level of cleanup, but that's those what I told you are the big ones.
So the mill buildings that do remain in the city, are those all owned, or are some of them vacant, or what's the story? I mean,
the mill buildings around the city, I mean, the real big ones are occupied in varying degrees. So some have been converted into residential. Some still do light industrial work. There are others that are used for storage. There's some vacancies, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because that creates opportunities for things like artist lofts and stuff. Or like in the case of the Kilburn Mills in the South End, an opportunity to display the big panorama that the Whaling Museum is displaying. We have an event there tonight in connection with that. So I think over time you'll see a lot of those mill buildings get filled up as there's greater demand for market rate housing, as well as some light industrial. So we've made progress in filling them back up.
So now we have a proposal for a marijuana retail place up off of Church Street behind Broder and Sons. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, there's some. So I'm not sure about that particular one. There may be. It wouldn't surprise me. There have been a number of entities that have inquired about where New Bedford is, and on marijuana, and the vote is coming up. I think on Tuesday. For the marijuana ordinance in the city council. So, that's moving forward. I think that's in the ordinance committee. In fact, I'm almost sure of it. It's coming up next week. So, there'll be some more clarity on where things are here in terms of where they can go and under what circumstances. But it wouldn't surprise me if there was somebody looking at that site at all. I think there have been a number that have been interested in like the Mount Pleasant area. There have been some others who have looked at other parts of the city.
I'm trying to think where behind Broder, though, it would go. I'm thinking of railroad tracks there.
Yeah, it may not be behind. I'm not sure if that's there may be interest along that strip on Church Street.
Right.
But in any case, yeah, once the city council passes the ordinance, you'll start to see some of these folks emerge.
Have there been? There's obviously been some inquiries.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there have been, and mostly for retail establishments, not so much for cultivation facilities. We did a host community agreement, as you know, for a cultivation facility in the business park. That one is so that one's moving forward. That was nominally for medical marijuana, but it'll open up also to recreational marijuana once it's ready to go.
I'm being told where George's Cigar Store is on Church Street. That's the location. So that would be actually to the side of Broder's.
Yeah, so I believe it. I mean, I think so. It doesn't surprise me that.
So does that fit into the map, the light industrial and the industrial zone? I mean, is that?
Yeah, I mean, there are buffers in my proposal to the city council that they can't; those things can't go within 200 feet of a home. So, depending on exactly where they have in mind, it may be within the buffer. It may not be. I mean, you've got houses on the other side of Church Street in that area, so it may not be a viable site. I don't know. It's hard to know without looking at the map.
Sure. So when this thing hits the council then on Tuesday night, then we start to move into full gear. That's when this really starts to roll out.
Yeah. Well, it'll go through ordinance committee and then it'll be subject to a vote by the full city council.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so my hope is that it's the city council's debated it. You know, what we've done is as we've talked, you and I have talked on the program before. We have. You know, we've reserved these businesses for industrial areas because we've heard loud and clear from neighborhoods that people don't want them next to their kids' schools or next to, you know, in the smack dab in the middle of residential areas. They don't want them in the downtown. And so, you know, we're trying to, you know, balance certainly the needs of the neighborhood and as well as to open up the city for opportunities in this business, in this industry. So, you know, what I would suggest to the city council is make sure that you're protecting neighborhoods and if, you know, and that we should take an incremental approach, right? It's easier down the line to loosen up restrictions if we think that's appropriate than to impose greater restrictions after the fact, right? Because by then, you know, the damage could be done. If we don't do this in a way that's thoughtful about neighborhoods, if we have an establishment plop itself down in a wrong place, that we're not going to be able to undo that. So we should be starting off first with some clearer lines about where these things should go, and if we think those lines need to be revisited, we can do that.
Councilor Rabel, who chairs the cannabis committee, just texted me. He said it's where George's Cigar Shop is on Church Street. He said it's Industrial B. It currently meets all of the requirements. So, I mean, that is within eyeshot of houses. There's no question about that.
Well, there aren't any requirements in place until the city council passes an ordinance.
Under the proposed requirements, I guess, right?
Yeah. So you know, my hope is that the city council puts neighborhoods first, and that we've worked with the city council to make sure that those protections are in place. And again, you know, if upon experience after a couple of years it feels like, you know, we can loosen those restrictions, then we can cross that bridge when we get to it. But for now, this is all brand new, and we should be proceeding with caution.
Yeah. So is that a location that you would prefer not to see?
Yeah, I don't want to opine. I don't know about the particulars of any business who's interested in that, so it's hard for me to say. I think in that for that particular location, it's somewhat industrial, but it's right up against the neighborhood as well. So if you live on Church Street right around there, you may not be wild about having, you know, a marijuana establishment right across the street. Well,
there's a Burger King and there's a Wendy's right around the corner, and you know, you got the coffee shop.
I think most people's opinions about
Honeydew is right there.
About Honeydew in the neighborhood.
Yep. The old Polish tank is right there. You know.
Yep, the Polish Veterans War Memorial's right there.
Yep. The bank. There's an ATM right across the street.
All things that people might find less objectionable than a marijuana dispensary in their neighborhood.
And there's going to be a train station right there too, right? You get off the train and walk over to the pot shop. And
you could, one-stop shopping, Barry. As long as the conductor's not going over there, right?
When is that going? Yeah, when is that going in? When is that train station going up?
Oh God, I don't know. You'll have to ask our state representatives when that's happening. You know, the South Coast Rail project we've talked about a lot before, and you know, I think things are proceeding on the Middleborough route. I mean, I reiterate my skepticism that that's the best way to go on that project, and but you know, it's one more thing for the city to offer folks who live here. I do think, I mean, as you know, there are other infrastructure projects in the city that would that are of more pressing need, like our favorite bridge right between New Bedford and Fairhaven, and that's the one I would put at the top of the list. But but in any case, as far as the stations go, the first station to be built would be the downtown one, and then at the Wales, or right by the Wales Tooth lot, and then after that, the one in the north end around right around the area you're describing, Kings Highway, that general area that would come afterward. So it's some undetermined point afterward.
I know I just handed it to you.
You just handed it, and you haven't had a chance. Read this and then give me an opinion about it.
Well,
in 30 seconds.
Well, it just the thought of it is fascinating, and I know you haven't had a chance to read it, but I mentioned this on the air the other day. Commonwealth Magazine. You can go to CommonwealthMagazine.com and take a look at the article. But South Coast Rail is headed in the wrong direction. This gentleman, Ari Ofsavet, do you know who he is? Ari Ofsavet?
Well, it says the back that he's actually a grad student. So
yeah,
So it's a good.
He's doing his thesis on this.
As student term papers go, it looks like it's a really good one. But.
So he's saying, revive rather than the Middleborough route, which he suggested nobody really wants, revive the old Mansfield route, and instead of sending it through Mansfield because you'd have to raise all the buildings, he's saying put it right up 495, right up the middle of 495. Well, I mean, just obviously, you just looked at this thing 30 seconds ago and haven't even had a chance to read it. But,
well, the Mansfield. So there have been pieces including in Commonwealth, about the Mansfield route lately. So Jim Aloisi, who was the one-time very well-respected state transportation secretary, wrote about this in Commonwealth Magazine about 2 months ago. And his point was that, that would connect us here. One of the points he's making, that would connect us here with the Northeast corridor of Amtrak, which is, I think, at some level very appealing to me, that you would have the ability to go from here and get on an Amtrak train somewhere around Attleboro or so and go down to New York or DC. So but I don't, in terms of cost, I mean, it really hasn't been explored all that much. Right. So it's hard to say.
Well, the reason I even bring it up, the reason I even bring it up is
it's a big project. I mean, you've heard me. If people have heard me, they know where my head is on this, and it's this. South Coast Rail is important, but it's not the only thing, and we have to.
It used to be the only thing.
It used to be the only thing.
Yeah, but the only reason I bring this up, which you just indicates
there ain't no only thing. It should be. If you're developing a regional economy, there can't be just one thing. Right?
Yeah, well, this is true. We can go back to the Golden Triangle, right, from way back when. But
whatever. But I mean, it isn't just one thing, right? So as much as we focus on fishing, we also want to do offshore wind. As much as we focus on manufacturing, we just can't do just that. We're trying to build a diversified economy here.
Absolutely.
And because if one thing fails, then things can fall apart. Apropos to our discussion a few moments ago about textiles.
Sure.
Because once that hit the fan, it was
that was the end.
It was awful.
Yeah. So I guess the reason I bring it up is the fact that obviously this is still not settled. There's still a lot of people that are not convinced that the Middleborough route makes a whole lot of sense, and people are still looking for options.
So you live in the North End. If you were going to take the train to Boston, let's say that station at Kings Highway wasn't there, because it won't be built until a few years after that line opens up. Would you drive from your house to downtown and then take the train up to Taunton and then over to Middleborough and then up, or would you just take the drive over to Middleborough, right? The hypotenuse of that more or less right triangle.
I'd go to Quincy Adams and take the red line.
Or you could do that, right? Yeah. But just say, but I think if you take a look at it, I think a lot of people in the North End, a lot of people in Acushnet and North Dartmouth they're not gonna drive all the way downtown, Freetown for sure. They will go all the way up to Middleborough to take the train in.
Yeah,
which they have available to them now. So,
absolutely.
So in any event, that's look. It's not an argument against the project. It's just
it just seems
point that people.
I don't see anybody rallying.
As the leader of the city, as someone who because the city leads economic development for the whole region,
right?
Making this as a regional point, you can't just say oh, just build the train and prosperity will follow. It's just not going to happen.
Not going to happen. But that was the belief for a lot of years. A lot of people thought that, or at least that's what they peddled to the public, and it never was true in my opinion. But to me, I mean, I'm with you on this. If you're going to spend $1 billion on a train,
I want to be real clear. I want the project. All I'm saying is, I want that, and I want a lot of other things, so that we build a sustainable, diversified economy here that allows.
But if we're going to spend this kind of money, let's do it in a way that satisfies people. If nobody's all that happy with it, and the reaction is lukewarm to it, why do it? I mean, it just seems like an awful waste of money. Until we can come up with a better plan, whether it be Stoughton or Mansfield or shooting at George Jetson cars up in the sky or whatever we're going to do. But I mean, if nobody's real excited about Middleborough, why spend the money? It just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, because I think they would say that they have to spend it on that line anyway, right? That it's largely money that they're going to need to rebuild the connection between Taunton and Middleborough, and that the money spent on this is under any scenario going to be the same money they're going to have to spend on on the Stoughton route. So I think that's probably the most compelling argument. It's money they're going to have to spend anyway.
All right, a couple of things. Got a message. I promised the gentleman, he sent me a message via email the other day and said, Barry, listen to your show in Providence. I'm working. I can't call in, but I want you to ask the mayor, with the feast rapidly approaching, we're going to see a whole lot of visitors. Coggeshall Street's a mess, and a lot of weeds, a lot of stuff going on, construction, trash all over the place. Can we get it cleaned up in time for the feast?
Yeah, we can get guys out there to clean up a little bit, and they certainly do it right around immediately around the feast grounds. Coggeshall Street's a little bit farther south, but that's still a construction project, and that's taken a long time, in part because it has been really two projects in one. It was first the underground work, last year to replace 100-plus-year-old sewer and water lines underneath. That has to happen first, and it's just one of those things, right? You don't see it, but it's there, and you see it when you turn your faucet on. And that has to be dealt with, and then so now that we're that part of the project, which costs almost $9 million, is done. We've turned to the surface work, which is moving along, and it's going to look nice, and as it should for that part of the city. And they deserve to have this entryway into the near north end that looks good and also is very functional.
But in terms of the highway, that should be MassDOT's responsibility in terms of trash and cutting the grass along the highway.
Around yeah. I mean, if you're talking about the sections that are along the highway, that is MassDOT's responsibility, and oftentimes we find ourselves having to jump into that responsibility ourselves and not wait for them. That's what I've told our guys to do. So.
All right, the other thing I wanted to kind of put a period at the end of at this point, too, is the huge controversy that erupted a couple of weeks ago with the firefighters and their boot collection for the Muscular Dystrophy Association up by the park, Route 6 and 140. The union president called the program, Tom Carrero, and insisted that he got a phone call from the police chief, Joseph Cordero, who told him in no uncertain terms that you guys are not to collect at that intersection. Now, the union claims that this came from you.
Yeah, they always do.
I got a statement. Yeah. Well, yeah, I got a statement from
everything. The
your
source
office
of
says
all
that you
evil.
didn't talk to the chief about it. All right. So, but did the chief? I mean, I've tried 5 times to communicate with the chief on this because I have seen the chief's letter. Your office made it available to me, where the chief said, "Look, you just got to follow these rules. Other than that, if you're going to be there, be safe. We can't take the Jersey barriers down as you want.
Yeah,
they have to stay there."
They'd asked to take the Jersey barriers off,
right?
And, we said we can't do that. Sorry, first of all, it's not safe. It is not safe out there. That was, that's the intersection of 2 state highways, right? So, walking in it goes without saying. You'd never let your own kid cross the street there, right? So it's because the cars travel at a high rate of speed, especially those coming off the highway that we've all seen. We're all familiar with that intersection, but. Beyond just the basic sort of safety concern is that, we would be on the receiving end of a lawsuit from the American Civil Liberties Union if we said, for you guys, we won't take those Jersey barriers off for the panhandlers that are there, but we'll take them off for the firefighters. I mean, the First Amendment, as courts have interpreted, doesn't distinguish between content, more or less, right? So, generally speaking, right? So, whatever the cause, whether it's somebody standing there with a sign that says, I'm homeless, please feed me, or if it's a firefighter passing the boot, it's all the same. So we can't do that. That was explained, and so it turned into this big controversy. So, we support the work that they do, the charitable work. It's great. I fully support it. I mean, they've raised money not just there, but also in the park during the Whaling City Festival. As well, and and that's the long and short of it. So police officers went out there and said, "Hey guys, it's not safe here. You got to be careful," and so which is entirely appropriate to do.
Were they ever told by the chief not to go there?
No, we can't be in there. We can't do that, right? So just like the panhandlers, they have a First Amendment right to stand there. We tell people they shouldn't be darting in and out of the street, like as happens sometimes. That is unsafe for reasons that I think are obvious to everybody. But no, I mean, they can stand on that median like anybody else. So
can anybody stand there now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Anybody who wants. I know there was.
Yeah,
I believe
didn't
we pass an ordinance a couple of years ago to stop like the baseball teams from collecting out there?
No, we can't do that.
Reasons. But I think before the Supreme Court ruling on the panhandlers, I think we passed an ordinance in New Bedford, didn't we?
Not since I've been mayor.
No.
No, and that would be struck down in a heartbeat.
Okay.
Yeah.
So kids can go back out and collect there.
They have a First Amendment right to do that. I think it would be a bad idea to put kids out in the intersection of two state highways to go, raise money. I mean, there's Shaw's right, within, 200 yards of that spot. They can do that there. In the case of the Whaling City Festival, which occurred that weekend, there was certainly ample opportunity to raise money there. So, look, I mean, it's unfortunate that that thing became such a big hullabaloo. I mean, it really is just a question of of whether the city would allow them, would remove the Jersey barriers for them. And the answer is, even if we wanted to, even if we thought that was a good idea, we'd be on the other end, the receiving end of a lawsuit sooner or later if we did.
All right, let me take the break. We'll come right back. I promise folks can call, and nobody's calling in. We got one call sitting there. We're going to get to it right after the break.
All right, let's get to that person.
508-996-0500. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back with the mayor. 508-996-0500, and as promised, going to get right to your calls. You're up next in WBSM. Good afternoon.
Yeah, Barry and Mayor Mitchell. It's nice talking with you.
Hi. Nice having you on.
Yeah, that article in Commonwealth Magazine, Barry, was the first original thinking I've seen on South Coast Rail in a number of years. It is a fascinating article. The gentleman's idea borrows from the concept that they used in New Mexico with a commuter service called the Roadrunner, where they run the trains down the middle of the interstate highways in the median. And the mayor is absolutely right. Both Middleborough and Stoughton have got serious problems, not just in the running time that it takes to get to Boston, which makes the service less attractive, but there's also very serious safety issues on both routes Middleborough's got two very bad curves at the end of the 6-mile-long straight, and that is an accident waiting to happen. And the Stoughton line, the idea of the single-track trestle, which would not have any emergency vehicle access out on it, is just insane.
So you recommend, first of all, you recommend the article for people to take a look at it, and second of all, you think it's worthy of some consideration.
I think it is very worthy of consideration. It's the first original thinking I've seen on this thing in years.
All right, let me hold you right there. Appreciate it. So I guess now you got to read that article, right?
I have to read it now. But as I said, there have been others who, including Jim, most prominently Jim Aloisi, who've written about that pretty recently, of the so-called Mansfield option. Yeah.
508-996-0500. You're up next with the mayor. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor. Quick question.
Yep.
I just tuned in just to hear it, but yesterday it was brought to my attention that there's this new Reform Act with these juveniles. Have you heard anything about this, that there are certain things that police cannot arrest juveniles, like lewd and lascivious behavior, trespassing, breaking and entering? Between the ages of 12 and 18, juveniles cannot be arrested in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
All right, let me hold you right there, because I want to just kind of fill the mayor in on what's going on here. But this has been something that's been all over social media within the last 24 hours. It's exploding on social media. It's supposedly part of the Criminal Reform Act of Massachusetts that was just enacted fairly recently.
Months ago,
according to one caller earlier, this was being handed out on a handout sheet, which I happen to have right here in front of me that you can take home too. I'm the only guy that gives the mayor homework assignments, right?
You give me the homework, and then you ask me to turn in the assignment within 15 seconds. Yes.
Well, apparently this was being handed out.
Tell me your opinion now.
Yeah, this was apparently handed out by a community policing officer last night at a meeting, a neighborhood meeting. There's no
in the city.
Yeah. Now, this is all over social media. We have done research. A member of the city council also tells us that she did some research. Nobody can find this. We're being told that this was part of the Criminal Reform Act that passed. They're saying July 13th. This was actually in April when the thing passed, so it wasn't July 13th. But there's nothing on that. It looks phony just to look at it. There's no, usually a changes to the law will have Massachusetts chapter XYZ.
Citations,
yeah, and there's nothing listed there with this. So,
well, it's not the complete.
But it's getting a lot of attention.
It doesn't look like it's a complete document.
It's getting an awful lot of attention. We've had calls on it. It's all over social media. The news department said calls on it, but we can't verify its authenticity. It just sounds. It doesn't sound right to me. It sounds like.
Well, I think so it's hard to react to this.
Yeah,
but
that's what they're talking about. Just in case.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would. So I don't know. We'll look into it, but I didn't. My impression of there were some juvenile justice reforms in that bill. I don't remember there being things in there as loosey goosey as the caller described. I hope not. I hope he's not right. He may be right about it. Yeah. I'll take a look at it. It may be worth, I would just make a suggestion. It may be worth having on your show somebody either from, UMass Law School or the DA's office to walk you through what's in the bill and what's not in the bill. Just because I think
that's my homework assignment.
That's your homework assignment. So I'm passing it right back to you.
All right, let me take a break. We're going to come back with our remaining moments with the mayor. Stay on the line. We'll be right back. We're out of here. News is next. Say goodbye, Mayor.
Goodbye, Mayor.
See you next week. Your calls after this news break. Stay tuned. Gotta go.